Let's do it.
KSAP Beats.
All right. Welcome to another episode of Wired In with Reveille. Let's get wired in and let's talk about some code. So last Friday, I talked about Spring Boot, diving back into Spring Boot framework. And it's been pretty fun. I think I mentioned, I did. I mentioned that I'm going to use Spring as my framework for enterprise apps. This is a framework that I used in the enterprise world. Especially, and I still use it today when I'm doing contract work for enterprises. I use Spring. Most organizations are using Spring. I think even Netflix, they're using Spring. They built their framework off Spring Boot. So Spring is a great framework for Java enterprise developers. And I wanted to build a REST API, and I want to consume this API in a UWP application just to show you that how simple it really is. So let's start off with, first off, I'm using IntelliJ. So IntelliJ is free. You can download IntelliJ. There's a community version. Then you have a proprietary version where you pay, I think, $120 a year. And then each year the subscription goes down. And I think after the third year, you only pay $89 lifetime, or you can pay $15 a month. So it's really worth it if you're a hardcore Java developer and you want to really get things up and running quick. IntelliJ will do that. I know a lot of times we have environmental errors in our IDEs, and Eclipse has a hard time, fixing that. Eclipse is another good one, but IntelliJ will fix the issues and dependencies for you, and it'll get everything up and running quick. So I'm using IntelliJ, and I create a project called Reveille GDP REST service. So this service is going to consume information about a country's GDP. So we're going to look at the top 8 countries' GDP for the year 2019-2020. So let's look at our project structure. If you have a Java background, you have your Maven folder, you have your source folder, you have your main, you have your Java folder where your classes go, and you have your resources, and you have your application.properties file. Here you set up everything. Now I have the username and password blank because this is actually deployed on my server and I didn't want to give this information away. So all you would have to do is spring.datasource.url and set the URL which database is talking to. And then we're going to go to our domain class, which is called Reveille GDP Domain. So I have 3 variables. I have ID, country GDP. That's it, because it's going to show the ID number, it's going to show the country, and it's going to show the country's GDP, which will be in trillions. So an integer, a string, and a double. And then I have my empty constructor, then I have my constructor with parameters, and then I have my getters and setters. So now let's go to our DAO, which is a DAO is data access object. This is where we'll interact with the database. Let's go to our interface. So we're just going to focus on get all data because this is the only thing I'm going to show for right now. You can also get by country I'll show that too, because in the application we'll be able to search a country's GDP in our UWP app. So I'll definitely show you these two methods. So let's go to our implementation class. And we have to use the repository annotation in Spring to let Spring know, like, hey, this class will interact with a database. And then we have our AutoWire annotation. We're using JDBC template to make our queries to the database. And JDBC template is just it's a Spring framework that's built on top of the Java JDBC API. So with JDBC template, you don't have to write the verbose code and set up, the driver class and all that. Spring takes care of that for you. And we're going to auto-wire it to let the Spring container handle this being and inject it in our application. So let's start with our get all data. So our get all data method will return a list with type Reveille GDP domain. So our query here, string, SQL, select from GDP. And so this method returns a list. So we're going to create a variable called Reveille list. So list, which takes type Reveille GDP domain, because that's the return type here. We're going to set that equal to JDBC template, and we're going to call the query method, and we're going to pass our SQL object, and then we're going to call our new Reveille mapper. So let's go down to Reveille mapper, which is down here. So we're going to create an inner class, and we're going to call it Reveille mapper, and it's going to implement RoleMapper. So the RoleMapper class in Spring allows us to iterate over a list. So our RoleMapper is going to take a type Reveille GDP domain, because this is the data we want. And so we're going to create a method inside here called Reveille GDP domain, map role, and it's going to return the object Reveille GDP domain. So here we're using our getters and setters. We're using our setters in this case in the Reveille GDP domain. So we're going to instantiate this object, and we're going to call our set ID, set country GDP, and we're going to return the result set, which is passing this method. And we're going to get, because it returns an int, so column index 1, column index 2, column index 3. So rs.get int, get string, get double, and then we're going to return this object. So then when we go up here, we can just create new Reveille RoleMapper, and it'll just iterate over that list. And so then for get country by GDP, it's going to return a list, and it's basically the same, except here we're going to pass an argument Reveille GDP domain. And the reason why we're doing this is because we don't want to I don't want to create new variables. So we'll just pass this just this domain, and we'll get what we need. And what's cool about Spring is you don't have to set an annotation at request param. Spring does the magic, and it detects that from our domain class, which is pretty cool. And you don't have to worry about like form or query param. It'll automatically convert it to what you need. So it's a little more flexible than Jersey. So string SQL, select all from GDP where country is like, and that's going to be country, like our country name. So here we're going to do the same thing, create a list object of Reveille GDP domain, create Reveille list object, and this time in our query we're going to pass JDBC template.query, and since we're going to we need to use a wildcard. We need to create a new object, because you can't add this into the query actually itself. So you have to create a new object array and use the percentage sign for like, which will go for here. And then you need to concatenate this with the get country. So if you see this, Reveille GDP domain dot get country, this is coming from here. Reveille GDP domain is calling our getters get country, and we're concatenate this with the percentage for the wildcard. I tried to do this in the query. I tried to put this here, and I received like a lot of exceptions. So this is the way it works. You can't do that in JDBC template. And then we're going to pass our Reveille test domain mapper, which is similar to Reveille RoleMapper. Okay. So again, it's like it's the same thing as Reveille RoleMapper. It just iterates over a row. Over rows. So now we're going to go to our Reveille GDP service, and we're going to use the request mapping GDP, right? The request mapping is GDP. The REST controller, we have to use the REST controller annotation to let Spring know, like, hey, this is our REST repository class. And you can just create your own methods here. So I just created a test method just to test to see if it deployed. So just to print this message, services are running. And then here's our get all method here that I created. And we're simply going to call our DAO get all method, which is also here. I forgot to mention Reveille GDP DAO. You need to create an object for that and auto wire that to let Spring inject this bean into our methods. So yeah, so get all method is going to return the list. So it's going to return a list of Reveille GDP domain. So here we're just returning Reveille GDP DAO, and we're going to call the get all data, which returns our list. Same thing for get country. We're going to use the annotation get mapping. Notice we use the annotation get mapping because we're just retrieving data. And we're going to turn a list of Reveille GDP domain, and we're going to call the get by country. And we're going to pass Reveille domain object here. So whatever is passed here, we're going to, that's what we're going to get, because it's going to get by country name. So we don't have to do Reveille GDP domain dot get country. We're going to pass our entire POJO. So now let's go to Postman. And here is the URL pragmaticdev.name /Reveille GDP /GDP /get all GDP. So if I hit send, it's going to send. And I believe I did a query with the get by country. So we're going to do Reveille GDP, which is the war file deployed /GDP, which was at our class at the beginning of our class /GDP /get by country. And here we're going to use a query param. So question mark for query param. And then our POJO is called country, right? And then equals United States. So before I query this, let me show you this. So in the GDP domain, I called this country. Now I probably could have called this country name, but I just called this country. And when we go to our GDP, Reveille GDP DAO implementation, and we're doing the query, it's calling Reveille GDP domain dot get country. So all we have to do is specify that in our query param. And in our service, that query param is going to pass through here, which is this object. So let's run this. So country equals United States. It should just query from the United States, and it does. It gives us the United States GDP, gross domestic product. So if you don't know what GDP is, it's a macroeconomic term for all goods and services for a particular country. So let's go to get all data again. And it gives us Yep. So, now I'm going to show you how this will work in a UWP application. All right, so now we're going to do I'm going to show you the UWP app that's going to consume this service. So let's start off with, this is our main page. And I just loaded Visual Studio, so I apologize if it's like really slow. I just closed IntelliJ. So Visual Studio okay, so it might not be too bad. So here's our XAML code. I don't think I need to necessarily show you that. Actually, I will. So first, let's look at the design. All right, so here we're just gonna see, you have load all GDP data, search GDP, search country GDP, and this is gonna show you the list. So let's look at our GDP class I created here, and this is gonna implement I notify property change, which is going to allow us to make changes on our UI. And so here we have our ID, country GDP. So pretty much the same as Java, but you said we just have get set. And now let's go to our GDP service. And I'm using NewSoft JSON library. So here we're going to return an observable collection, and we're going to have a T here because we can pass our own type, because I'm creating a method get all GDP data, and it's going to pass the observable collection list. And here we're just going to have a client variable, set that to new HTTP client, and then we're going to create our response, await client.getAsync, and this is going to be our URL for what I just showed you in Postman to get all our data. And then I call this string JSON await response, read as string, and then if it's not empty, then we're going to show we're going to deserialize our list, and then we're going to return it. And our list is going to be GDP service. GDP the GDP class. Same thing we get by country, pretty much the same thing here, except I just changed the URL. So now let's go to our main class. And I have a low GDP data, so observable collection. Remember, we have our T type that I passed here, which will be GDP. So GDP, called the GDP list, equals new observable collection of type GDP. And we're going to GDP data. So in our UI, now let's go ahead and look at the XAML. So this is the important part. We're going to use the data template to show our data. And the data type is going to be local GDP, which is our GDP class. And then we're going to have a text block, which is going to bind our data. So we're using data binding, ID, country GDP. That's all in our GDP class. And so this list view is called GDP data. So when we go on our main page, GDP data is what we're going to get the item source. We're going to, this is asynchronous, so await GDP service class, and we're going to call our get all GDP data, and we're going to pass our list. And it's the same thing for country. And except we're going to pass GDP search text in here because we're getting it by country. So we're going to search by the country. So let's run this. Give this a second. This should run, and it will run, and it should automatically load our data upon launching the application. Come on, load. Load. Come on. This does, the other day it didn't do this, so come on. There we go. So now let's load the data. Oh, there we go. United States, China, Japan, Germany, India, France, United Kingdom, Italy. So now let's search for the GDP. So let's search for India, right? It gives us India, 3.16 in trillions. So let's go ahead and load all the data again. See how simple that is? So this is actually this is how you do it. This is how you consume a Spring REST API in UWP. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I think I'll do another tutorial or podcast like this. I guess you can call this a tutorial. I know I went kind of fast. If you're not familiar with UWP, it's pretty simple. Here we have our button clicks, and I'm just loading my country data, calling the methods here. It's pretty self-explanatory. And again, here's our UI. Let me zoom out so you can see a little bit. Yeah, here's our UI. This is where our list view is. This is our GDP class, GDP service, where we actually consume our REST API. And that's it for this episode with Wired In with Apavelli. Please visit apavelli.com. Please subscribe to the podcast. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is Wired In with Apavelli podcast, where you can see the video of this, unless you're watching the video now. And if you're watching the video, if you want to listen to audio of the podcast, you can subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to see me talk about Angular or any other technologies, please give me feedback. I would love to talk about just about anything that I can. And that's it. Stay wired in and happy coding. Oh, wait. You can follow me on Instagram at Apavelli. You can follow me on Twitter at Apavelli. You can follow me on Facebook at Apavelli. See the consistency there? So, seriously this time. That's it for this episode. Stay wired in, stay in the lab, and remember, your passion should be your entertainment.